The snow didn't fall that morning. It simply waited quiet and heavy in the sky, as if holding its breath. Miriam Ellery sat on the edge of the ruined porch, the charred wood beneath her still warm. Smoke curled from the collapsed roof behind her, rising like the spirit of a house that once knew laughter, stew on the stove, and the sound of Silas's boots coming home from the forge. He'd been gone a year now, 1 year to the day. She didn't plan it that way. The fire had its own sense of timing. Her hands red from the cold held tight to a half-burned picture frame. The glass had cracked, warping Silas's face into a strange smile. It made her feel something close to rage. Then it passed like every other feeling lately without much of a fight. Miriam was 67, tall for a woman though it no longer mattered. The world had stopped measuring her by beauty or youth long ago. Now she was just the widow on Black Hollow Ridge. Folks in Dry Willow didn't visit much, not after the funeral. She hadn't given them reason to. She liked the silence, or so she told herself. Each morning she cooked for two. 2 plates, 2 cups. Her husband's fork placed neatly on the left where it had always belonged. She washed it after dried it and returned it to its drawer. Routine was easier than grief, repetition easier than remembering. When the fire began crackling low in the back corner of the cabin, she didn't move. She watched it grow, let it dance along the rafters like some long-lost hymn come to claim what remained. It wasn't until the smoke stung her eyes that she stepped outside, slow and silent like someone leaving a church. No panic, no screaming. Just the same quiet she'd been living in now, made of ash instead of air. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since the day they buried him beneath the old pine. She thought maybe she couldn't anymore. The wind picked up, stirring the snow into little ghosts across the frozen ground. Miriam pulled her shawl tighter, more from memory than need. And that's when she heard it, the creak of wagon wheels. A shape appeared down the ridge road. A man bundled in furs driving a cart heavy with firewood. He stopped when he saw her step down slow. Their eyes met. He didn't ask if she was all right. Didn't say a word. He just lifted the first bundle of wood and walked toward what was left. And somehow that was worse than any sympathy. Because it meant she was still here, and someone had noticed. Ask ChatGPT. He didn't knock, just leaned the bundle of firewood against what used to be the porch railing, then turned and went back for another. Miriam watched him without moving. He was broad in the shoulders, hair graying at the temples, beard trimmed more out of habit than vanity. His coat looked handmade, worn smooth at the elbows, stitched with care. The kind of care men don't give things unless they live alone. When the last bundle was stacked, he finally spoke. "You need heat," he said, voice low, almost gravel. "This'll burn slow. Dry pine cut last spring." Miriam nodded once, that was all. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask her name, just looked at the half-burnt cabin, then back at her. "You got anywhere to go?" She answered without meaning to. "I did, it burned." He didn't smile, just looked around like he was measuring something only he could see. "Town's not far," he said after a moment. "Dry Willow, maybe 6 miles. Store's open, Reverend'll take you in if you ask." "I'm not asking," she said, sharper than intended. He didn't flinch, just nodded once like he understood. A silence settled between them, thick as the snow clouds overhead. He reached into the back of the cart, pulled out a dented kettle and a small tin of loose-leaf tea. "No offense," he said, placing them carefully on the stoop, "but you look like you could use a hot drink more than a sermon." Miriam blinked. Not because he was wrong, but because it had been a long time since someone saw her without trying to fix her. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Jonas Reese." He said it like it didn't matter, like he wasn't used to saying it aloud anymore. "You live up there," she gestured toward the ridge. "Past the switchback. Cut wood for the town. Nobody sees me unless they run out of fire." Miriam looked at the man, then at the woodpile, then at her blackened home. "Guess I ran out of more than fire." For the first time he smiled, just a flicker. Nothing that showed teeth. "I can help patch the shed," he offered. "You'll freeze if you sleep out here. I've got a coat." "So do the dead," he said, matter of fact. There was no warmth in the statement, just truth. The kind folks used to speak before conversation became performance. He got to work without waiting for her answer. Found a rusted hammer by the rubble, tested the nails for strength. She watched from the steps, arms folded tight. Most men would have tried to impress her, tried to save her. Jonas didn't. He just worked. Quiet, steady. Like the forest itself had handed her a man-shaped silence and said, "This one won't ask anything of you except space to breathe." By sundown, he'd cleared the ruined beams and boarded up the leeward wall of the shed with spare planks from his cart. It wouldn't last a storm, but it'd keep out the cold tonight. He set the kettle over a small flame outside. When the water boiled, he poured it over the tea leaves and handed her the cup without a word. She took it, let the heat warm her hands before lifting it to her lips. It tasted like cedar and smoke and something unfamiliar. "What is this?" "Spruce tip and chamomile," he said. "Picked it last season." She took another sip. "It tastes like something I don't remember." He didn't answer, just nodded once satisfied. When he left, he didn't say goodbye, didn't ask if she'd be all right. He just nodded toward the stack of wood. "I'll come back tomorrow. Snow's coming." Miriam wanted to say no, wanted to tell him she didn't need help, didn't want kindness, didn't want to owe anyone a damn thing. But she didn't. She just watched him go cart creaking through the frost-covered earth. And when she turned to the shed, she realized something strange. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. Someone had seen her and hadn't turned away. The next day, he came back. Didn't knock, didn't call out. Just arrived with more wood, a lantern, and a small sack of nails slung over his shoulder. This time, Miriam had already swept out the shed, moved what few belongings survived the fire, and laid down 2 wool blankets over a stack of hay for a makeshift bed. Jonas didn't comment on the setup. He just knelt beside the wall and started reinforcing the boards, humming low under his breath. Not a song she recognized, just rhythm. Earthy, simple. The kind of sound a man makes when no one's listening. "You hum when you work," Miriam said, watching from the threshold. He didn't look up. "Helps me keep time." To what?" He paused a moment. "The parts that don't break." Miriam didn't answer. There wasn't much to say to that. By mid-afternoon, the shed had walls strong enough to stand to win a working door, and thanks to an old iron stove, Jonas uncovered from her cellar a tiny flicker of warmth. "Won't roast a chicken," he said, testing the heat, "but it'll keep your bones from cracking." Miriam was folding what remained of her linens. One quilt had survived, half-burned at the edges, smelling of ash. It had been made by her mother-in-law, patched over the years, worn soft by decades of use. She held it up by 2 corners. A singed hole cut through one square right where Silas's initials had been stitched. "I should throw it out," she muttered, not expecting him to answer. Jonas didn't glance her way. "Depends what it meant. Some things stop being useful but don't stop being true." His words sat heavy in the room. She sat with the quilt in her lap, fingers brushing the seams, remembering nights when Silas had pulled it over her shoulders after she'd fallen asleep by the fire. Remembering how he never asked her to shrink, never once made her feel like she took up too much space. Without thinking, she reached for her sewing kit. The thread was coarse, the needle dull, but she began working the edge with slow, practiced hands. Jonas watched from across the room, silently sliding over a scrap of canvas from his satchel. "Use this," he said. "It's tight weave, won't tear easy." She nodded and sewed it into the hole. They didn't speak for a while. Just the sound of thread pulling, fire, crackling, wind moaning against the boards like a tired spirit. After some time, Jonas stood and stretched. "You ever lose anything besides the house?" Miriam didn't answer at first. Her fingers paused above the fabric. "I lost a baby once," she said, soft as breath. 40 years ago. Didn't tell Silas till years later. Thought he'd leave me." Jonas didn't flinch. Didn't offer sympathy or cliché. He just sat back down, legs folded beneath him, eyes steady. "Did he see when, No," she said. "He held me. Said I was more than that. Said I was still here." Jonas nodded. "I had a daughter," he said. "Came out early. Cried like thunder. Lived 3 days." He didn't cry when he said it. His voice didn't waver. It was a truth he'd worn thin with time but never forgot. "I buried her myself," he said. "Didn't mark it. Didn't want anyone to come and feel sorry for her." Miriam looked at him and for the first time didn't see a stranger. Just another heart-bruised quiet. They sat in silence. 2 survivors beneath a patch quilt. Not lovers, not even friends. Just people who still hadn't figured out how to stop showing up. The wind howled again outside, flinging snow against the wood. Inside, the stove glowed red, and for the first time in too long, Miriam didn't dread the night. She lay beneath that quilt, burned, stitched, and stained, and felt something she hadn't let herself feel since Silas died. Safe. Not whole, not healed, but safe enough to sleep. The next morning, the light came soft and reluctant through the cracks in the shed wall. Miriam woke before the frost had lifted her breath, visible in the air, the quilt still warm against her legs. Jonas had already gone, left a small tin of dried apples by the stove, along with a folded note that simply read, "Storm coming in 2 days. I'll bring extra kindling. Jay." She stared at the handwriting for a while. It was neat, blocky. The way men wrote when they didn't want to reveal too much. After breakfast, black tea and hard biscuits, Miriam dug through the wreckage of what had been her home. Smoke-stained timber, shattered dishes, the remains of her old wardrobe. Most of it useless now, just memories baked into ruin. But behind the stone chimney, buried beneath fallen shingles and soot, she found the box. It was iron-dented, scorched at the edges, but still latched. She brought it into the shed, sat cross-legged near the fire, and opened it. Inside, letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to Silas Ellery, though none had ever been mailed. She had started writing them the day after his funeral, a ritual to keep herself sane. Most began the same way: I saw something today you would have liked. Or the mule kicked the gate again. You'd have cursed loud enough to wake the ridge. But as time passed, the words changed. They became heavier, honest, raw. One letter written the week before the fire read, Silas, I'm angry with you, not for dying, for leaving first. You always promised I'd go first. You said you'd carry me if I couldn't walk anymore. I believed you, and now I can't carry even myself. Another instance, I lied to you once, a long time ago, about the baby. I told you I was fine, but I wasn't. I thought if I stayed broken, you'd see me differently. I didn't know then that you already saw the whole of me and stayed anyway. Miriam pressed the papers to her chest. For a moment, the shed felt smaller, like her memories were pressing in from the walls. When Jonas arrived that afternoon, snow in his beard and boots soaked through, he paused at the doorway. You look like you found something heavy, he said. She didn't hide the box, just pushed it toward him. Letters, she said. To my husband. I never sent them. Never meant to. I just didn't know where else to put the hurt. Jonas sat beside her, hands rough from years of axe work, now gentle as he lifted the top letter. Meo? Inemimum. Chenehi. She nodded. He read in silence, his lips tightening just slightly. When he finished, he set the page down with care, like it was something sacred. They're good letters, he said. They say what most folks never find the courage to say out loud. Miriam looked at him. You ever write anything down? No, he said. I swing steel. It don't translate well to paper. She smiled faintly. You should. You talk better than you think. He let that sit a moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. I brought you something. She unwrapped it, a small carved wooden box, hand-shaped with smooth corners and a simple latch. I made it last winter. Didn't know what for. Guess I do now. Miriam placed the letters inside one by one, folded them like keepsakes instead of confessions. When the last letter was in, she closed the lid, fastened it shut. Thank you, she whispered. Jonas nodded, his eyes lingering on her face just a moment too long. That night after he'd gone, Miriam lay under her patch quilt and reread one of the older letters. It ended with, I'm still here, Silas, not whole, but still standing. Maybe that's enough. And for the first time, she believed it. Because now someone else had read the words. Someone who didn't flinch, someone who didn't fix her, didn't flee, just stayed. Sometimes that was all the healing you got, and sometimes that was enough to begin again. It was a Tuesday when the Reverend came calling with a younger man in tow, all nervous smiles and polished boots. They didn't wait to be invited in, just stood outside the shed with papers in their hands and concern in their eyes. Miriam, the Reverend, said, his voice soft but rehearsed, we've been worried. The fire, the winter coming, it's too much for one woman to shoulder alone. She stepped outside, slowly, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. The air was thin, sharp, the kind of cold that made bones whisper. I'm not asking for help, she replied. We know. That's why we came, he said, glancing at the other man. This is Elijah Green from the state office. We've arranged for a room at the St. Helena home. It's warm, quiet. 3 meals a day, no obligation. The words sat in the air like ash. You came to take me away, Miriam said flatly. No, nothing like that, Elijah chimed in. Just options. You've had a hard year. This place, it's peaceful, a good place to heal. Healing, she echoed dry. You think healing is something you find in white walls and quiet halls. The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. We just want what's best for you. You mean safe, she said, voice rising now. You want me somewhere that makes you feel better. Behind her, footsteps approached. Jonas, coat dusted in frost, axe still slung over his shoulder. He caught the tension before a word passed. Didn't say anything, just stood next to her. The Reverend's tone shifted, more formal, more guarded. Mr. Reese, this doesn't concern you. Jonas's gaze didn't waver. If she tells me to leave, I will. But Miriam didn't. Instead, she stared at the 2 men in front of her, then at the shed behind her. It was crooked, drafty, and barely holding together, but it had warmth. and something else no one had offered her in months: dignity. "Elijah," she said, "do you have a wife?" He blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "Does she sleep better knowing where you are each night?" I suppose so." Miriam nodded. "Then go home to her. Tell her you met a woman who already buried one life, and she's not ready to be buried again." They left papers still unsigned. The Reverend touched her hand before leaving. "You've always been proud, Miriam." "No," she said softly. "I've just been alone too long to let someone else choose for me." When the wagon rolled out of sight, Jonas remained silent. She could feel him watching her, not with admiration, but concern. "You angry?" she asked, without looking at him. "No." "Then say something." He was quiet for a while. "Then I thought you might go." Miriam turned to face him. "And you'd just fade back into the woods?" He shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time." "Why does that make me so damn mad?" she muttered, more to herself than to him. "You walk in like a ghost, hand me firewood, fix my roof, and then what? Disappear like it didn't happen." Jonas looked at her now, really looked. The lines on his face were deep, not from age, but from silence, from bearing the weight of things too long alone. "I stayed longer than I meant to," he admitted, "because it stopped feeling like something I had to do. Started feeling like something I wanted to." She stepped closer. "So stay." He blinked. "You sure?" "No," she said. "I'm not sure of anything. But I'd rather rebuild something with shaky hands than sit in a clean room and wait to die." A long pause, then his shoulders dropped just a little. "I ain't much of a builder," he said. Miriam smiled faintly. "You built a door that doesn't slam. That's more than most men ever manage." That night she made stew, thin but hot. She poured 2 bowls no longer out of habit but intention. They ate in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because there was finally no need to explain the way it felt to sit across from someone and just be. Before bed, Miriam lit a single candle, placed it on the windowsill, and watched the snow begin to fall soft flakes against the night. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. She had chosen, not out of desperation, not because someone offered a bed, but because for the first time in a long, long while, she wanted to stay. Ask ChatGPT. The storm arrived just after midnight. Not the kind that dances across rooftops, but one that presses, heavy, insistent. Snow piled fast, thick enough to swallow fences and silence even the wolves. Miriam and Jonas spent most of the morning inside, huddled close to the stove, taking turns feeding it small logs like rationed hope. The walls creaked, the wind howled, but inside that crooked shed, patched and imperfect, they were warm. By noon, Jonas grew restless. He paced, checked the door hinges, repacked kindling, adjusted the stovepipe as if he could wrestle peace from action. "I need to walk the ridge," he said finally. "There's a trap line I set too close to the bluff. If the snow hits it wrong, I'll lose the whole thing." Miriam looked up from mending her sleeve. "You'll freeze out there. I won't be long." She wanted to stop him, but she understood. Some things weren't about logic. Some things were about not letting the land think it had won. "Take the scarf," she said, handing him Silas's old woolen wrap. "It's ugly, but it won't let go." Jonas smiled, then disappeared into the white. The hours passed slowly. Miriam tried to busy herself stitching, sweeping, rereading the old letters in their new wooden box, but a knot grew in her stomach with each passing hour. The wind screamed against the walls louder now, impatient. When dusk fell and he hadn't returned, she packed a small lantern and stepped outside. The snow was knee-deep. She pushed against it one slow step at a time, the wind slicing her cheeks raw. The world was reduced to white in wind and worry. Then she saw the blood. Small drops, half buried in the snow, trailing toward the ravine past the ridge. Her breath caught, her pulse surged. She followed without thinking, the lantern flickering wildly in the gale. Just beyond the bluff near a bent cedar, she found him. Jonas lay curled, half buried, one arm shielding his face. His leg was twisted unnaturally. The trap line had snapped. The hillside gave way beneath him. He was conscious, but barely. "Miriam," he rasped. She dropped beside him, hands shaking. "Don't speak. Don't move." "I thought I could beat it," he murmured. "Thought if I hurried." "You're a fool," she snapped, pressing her coat over his chest, her own body blocking the wind. "A stubborn, lonely fool." He smiled through cracked lips. "Takes one to know one." She didn't laugh. Couldn't. Not when his skin was going pale, his breath shallow. Somehow, by sheer will or something older, she dragged him back. Step by brutal step. Her knees gave out twice. Her shoulders screamed from strain. But she didn't stop. Not once. By the time she slammed the shed door shut behind them, the world outside had vanished in white. She laid him near the stove, stoked the fire, high-wrapped every quilt and coat she owned around his body, boiled water, pressed it to his skin, rubbed life back into his fingers. Jonas drifted in and out, fevered, mumbling things she didn't understand. But when his hand found hers in the dark, he gripped it like something sacred. "I thought I'd die out there," he whispered. Miriam leaned in forehead against his. "You don't get to leave me too," she said, voice trembling. "Not yet." Then softer. "Isiridun. Not after I've finally remembered what it feels like to be seen." Outside, the storm screamed, but inside she held his hand tight and waited for the warmth to return. Ask ChatGPT. When Miriam opened her eyes, the storm was gone. The wind had fallen silent, leaving behind a world washed clean. Trees bowed under blankets of snow, fences erased every path rewritten. But inside the shed, the fire still glowed, low, stubborn in its embered breath. Jonas was asleep. His face looked softer in the morning light, less carved from stone. The fever had broken sometime in the night. His breathing was steady now. One hand rested over the quilt she'd tucked around him like a promise. She stood slowly, knees aching, fingers numb. The kettle was empty, the firewood stacked low. But she smiled because he was still here. Still here. She opened the door and stepped into the quiet. No sound, just snow deep and glistening. Her breath fogged in the air. For a moment it felt like she was the only living soul left in the world. And yet for the first time in months she didn't feel alone. She dug a narrow path toward the well boots, sinking deep. Every movement a strain, but one filled with purpose, with life. When she returned, cheeks flushed, she found Jonas sitting up against the wall, blinking through sleep. "You're awake," she said, surprised at how tightly those two words wrapped around her ribs. He gave her a weak smile. "You're louder than the storm." She poured water into a tin cup, held it to his lips. "Drink, slowly." He did, then leaned back again, eyes fluttering shut. "I had a dream," he muttered. "You were yelling at me. Something about trap lines and being a mule-headed bastard." She arched a brow. "That wasn't a dream." He chuckled, winced, "Thought so." A long silence followed, filled only by the crackle of wood and the soft breath of snow melting on the window frame. Then softly, Jonas asked, "Why didn't you let them take you?" Miriam didn't answer right away, just stared at the flicker of flame in the stove. "Because I've lived a life where I let other people tell me when to rest, when to cry, when to stop fighting. And now, bueno, ponamenon." Now she said, "I'll stop when I decide I'm done." Jonas nodded once, fair. She looked at him. "And you, why'd you stay?" He hesitated. "I've been alone for so long, I forgot what my voice sounded like next to someone else's. Then I met you and suddenly I didn't want to hear silence anymore." Her chest ached at the honesty in it. Not poetic, not polished, just raw truth spoken without armor. She crossed the small space between them, sat beside his bedroll. "I thought I was too late," she said, "too burned, too bitter." "Turns out," Jonas said, reaching for her hand, "you were just right on time." The words sat between them like a sunrise, slow, warm, undeniable. Later that afternoon, children from Dry Willow appeared down the path, shouting that the church bell had rung, the storm was over, help was coming. Townsfolk would be checking homes, counting heads, clearing roads. Miriam nodded, thanked them, and sent them back with a loaf of bread and the last of her dried apples. Jonas watched her as she returned, snow clinging to the hem of her coat. "You sent the kids off like you were the sheriff," he said. She smiled. "Someone's got to keep the law." That night, they sat by the fire again. No words this time, just warmth. Familiar silence. Two people wrapped not in perfection, but in the scarred fabric of second chances. And when Jonas reached into his coat and handed her a folded note, her own handwriting torn from a letter she'd burned weeks ago, her breath caught. "You saved this." He nodded. "You wrote that you were tired of being invisible." She unfolded it, read the words again. "I want someone to see me and not look away." Miriam looked at him, and for the first time she didn't feel the weight of loss. She felt the weight of beginning. Some stories don't end in fire or silence. Some begin in the ashes with two hands reaching for each other in the dark. If this story stirred something in you, pull your chair closer to the fire. There's more where that came from. Subscribe to Still Winds of the West. Let's keep telling stories that remember what hearts forget.